What should the Cowboys expect from Sam Williams during his rookie season? And can Dante Fowler return to his Pro Bowl form? All that and more this episode of the Locked On Cowboys podcast.
You are Locked On Cowboys, your daily Dallas Cowboys podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Locked On Cowboys. Locked On Cowboys.
Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We want to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. We are free and available on all platforms. Today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. I am Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. He is Landon McCool. Check him out on Twitter at McCoolBCB. Landon, how you doing today, sir?
I'm doing well. I was getting a nice big sip of coffee because we have a lot of defensive ends to talk about today. So I'm excited to get to it. And this is a position that's clearly in some kind of transition. So there's a lot of exciting stuff to talk about.
Yeah, we are less than a month away from the Cowboys kicking off training camp out in Oxnard. Should be a lot of fun. So we're going to continue previewing these positions. Today we're talking about edge rushers, and there's a lot of them. We're going to start with this at the very top, though, Land. We're actually going to spend some of our show later this week talking about Micah Parsons as a linebacker, but he certainly factors into this pass rush. But really quickly, how much better could Micah Parsons be as an edge rusher in 2022?
It's really interesting proposition. I don't want to get too much into it, but I think that there's things that, posing and, proving him that are going to make him either better or worse. I think teams are going to be more prepared for him. He's going to get a lot more attention. They've talked about it. He's going to get attention as a big instead of a small. So that'll change the protections and the schemes that they'll use against him. Then again, he will also be a much more developed pass rusher. He didn't take a lot of time to kind of learn the position. So it's interesting to see kind of all of that plus, a sophomore jump and how that all fits in. I think he obviously can be better. The question is, does that happen immediately, or does he kind of take maybe a step back as he's being kind of adjusted to league-wide and the protection scheme? So it'll be interesting to see.
Yeah. Again, we're going to talk about Parsons later on this week, so make sure you guys tune in for that. But let's talk about the rest of the defensive ends on the roster. And let's start with the biggest or the biggest name one, right? Demarcus Lawrence, who the Cowboys agreed to a 3-year extension with this offseason. I believe this is the 9th year of his career. Yeah,
that sounds right. Yeah,
something like it's kind of incredible. But Demarcus Lawrence going into his age 30 season, coming off a season where he broke his foot between weeks 1 and 2. What can we expect from him this year? Because if you just were to look at the sack totals, 5 in 2019, 6.5 in 2020, 3 last year, you might think this is a really, a declining player. But is that the truth?
No, I don't think, on a per snap basis, it is the truth. I think he's still playing at an incredibly high level. He just didn't play a ton of snaps, and whether it's because of back stuff he's had in the past and, kind of compounding things, or just fluky injuries like he had with this foot injury. I think that there has been times when he's been off the field, and I think that has obviously had an effect on his, total output number. And I think that kind of is what unfortunately forms the opinion for a lot of the vast majority of people that watch football, is they kind of just box score scout. But if you watch what he's doing on a per snap basis, he's incredibly disruptive. He's still one of the most disruptive players in the NFL. I think, especially in the run game, he is probably maybe the best run defender in football.
According to Pro Football Focus last year, he was the best run defender in the NFL when it comes to edges. And in fact, it really wasn't even close. There was only 5 edge rushers last year that had a grade of 80 or better stopping the run. Demarcus Lawrence was the only player above 88.2. He had a grade of 92.5. Absolutely dominant. Like if you go look at like his run stop rate and the number of stops that he has or tackles behind the line of scrimmage, I mean, it's like off the charts good as a run defender. And I know people are saying you don't pay a guy a lot of money to be a run defender, but he's a really good pass rusher who just happens to be the best run stopping edge rusher in the league.
Yeah, I mean, let's again. I know people are kind of have a tendency to kind of box score scout situations like this. It's tough to try to determine production of the defensive line position if you don't know necessarily what you're looking at. But this is a guy who constantly had blocking schemes tilting towards him. The teams were still respecting him. He still was winning at key moments. He has the ability to win with skill and not necessarily require the kind of elite athleticism that some of these other pass rushers win with. So I think that that's something that's going to continue to kind of uh, work for him as he continues to get older. Now, the key thing with Demarcus Lawrence is being on the field, is being healthy. If he's on the field and he's healthy, I think you've got an incredibly productive, one of your best defenders on the team, one of your best players on the team.
Yep.
If he's kind of on and off due to injuries, then you obviously you just don't get nearly as many snaps as you would normally. I mean, I think if you look at the snap counts, that's the thing that's where he can improve. That's where he can get better this year is if he's just on the field more.
I've got him right here. So this is last year. So the first game of the season against Tampa Bay, played 66% of the snaps. The rest of the way, 53% in his first game back against the Saints, 69 against Washington, 63 against the Giants, 42 against Washington, 66 against Arizona, 39 against Philly, and then 75% against the 49ers. I think the ideal number for him is probably right around 60%, 65%. I don't think the Cowboys want to get into a situation like they were in 2019, 2070, or 2019 and 2020, where he was playing 72, 77% of the snaps.
Yeah, I think that's the key, keeping his count down. I mean, you just don't need him out on that many snaps throughout the year. It's time to kind of rotate him in when you need him the most, and having him there for key situations and key games, that's super important. So one of the things we'll talk about as we go on through this is that the Cowboys have incredible depth here. I mean, you can say what you want about the second and third pass rushers. We'll figure out exactly how well that will be solved. But I think as far as depth goes, as far as number of folks that you can confidently throw out there to play snaps,
Yep.
I think the Cowboys are in a good situation.
Yeah, I still think Demarcus Lawrence is. I don't know if he's a top 5 edge rusher anymore, like he was maybe a little bit earlier in his career, but man, you'd be hard pressed to find 10, 12 guys that are better than him all around when he's on the field. I mean, I went back and watched his snaps against Washington, the first Washington game, and he was unbelievable. So if he can stay healthy, the Cowboys will have one of the more disruptive players in the league.
Real quick, the talk about Micah Parsons and the increased attention, that could be a huge boon for Demarcus Lawrence. I mean,
Yes.
Demarcus Lawrence was the one dictating the predictions last year. If the onus starts shifting over to Micah Parsons, I mean, as it absolutely should, Demarcus Lawrence is the person who could be the biggest beneficiary of that.
Yeah, Demarcus Lawrence is a sneaky bet to win Defensive Player of the Year. I actually think he could have a really nice season. If you want to bet on that, go ahead and check out betonline.net. It is your number one source for all of your betting needs and sports info. Find all the latest sports developments, league reviews, and news, including this year's NHL playoffs, which actually just wrapped up. We've got Major League Baseball. BetOnline is your continued source for all of your sports wagering information, including live betting, esports, and scores. And betonline.net remains the best spot for all of your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in action. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, let's run through some of these other pass rushers for the Cowboys. Let's start with Dante Fowler, who the Cowboys signed early on in free agency. They gave a 1-year deal to. Not a lot of money, but this is somebody that Dan Quinn recruited when he was at Atlanta. Was very productive with the Rams for a while. What are you expecting from Dante Fowler this year with the Cowboys?
Yeah, actually, Quinn recruited him when he was at Florida, coming out of high school. That's how long these two have had a relationship with each other. So, I think this is a situation where when Randy Gregory's contract situation fell through, Fowler was available. He was a guy that obviously Quinn was comfortable and familiar with. He was a guy that you could thought. I mean, the idea was never that Dante Fowler was a replacement for Randy Gregory. It was that, okay, Gregory's not here. We're going to need to use up some of these snaps. We'll probably redistribute some more to Parsons. But we also need another body in here to kind of rotation, because before, have to remember that this was before the draft, so they didn't know that Sam Williams was coming in either. So they go out and they get Fowler as kind of a guy that is a stopgap at the very least, a solution for what they want to do. And then, with the hope that someone like Williams can develop, someone like Golston can take a step and make Fowler kind of obsolete. Or the other way that this could work out is that Fowler kind of finds a natural fountain of youth and goes back to, I don't know, like, was it 2 years ago that he had like 10 sacks for the Rams? So. I think these are things. The issue with Fowler has been consistency, and about finding consistency down and down out. You hope that maybe being part of a rotation and not being kind of the onus of the pass rusher. I think that's been the issue with Fowler almost his whole career, is that he's usually been the best, defensive end on his team when he's been there, and that's not always the best. Fowler is not exactly like the guy that you want as your best defensive end on your team.
Correct.
Right.
Yes.
Like he's a guy you want as part of a rotation. So, this could be a situation that could really work out well for the Cowboys, because it could be that Fowler is finally kind of in a spot that fits his skill set. But he's also, he's not being paid so much that you can't get rid of him if someone younger takes his spot. He's in a situation where he's going to have to earn his place on this team. I think that puts the Cowboys in a good spot to have a guy that is, going to have to earn his spot, work for his spot, not just, be given it. So that just promotes more competition, which I think is good for this team.
All right, so this is a new idea that I've been just kind of thinking about the last couple of days, but I think there's a couple different types of edge rushers. There's creators and there's finishers, right? I feel like Demarcus Lawrence is a creator, right? He creates chaos and havoc on the defensive line, which ultimately leads to other players getting the sacks or other players making plays, right? Fowler is at his best when he is finishing sacks, right? And you saw that with the Rams, right? When he had Aaron Donald that was creating, just pressure up front, Fowler was really good at turning that pressure in front of him or next to him into sacks. I think he gets into trouble a little bit when it's, hey, we just need you to win every single rep, or we need you to win by yourself one-on-one. I think his game is more built on athleticism and effort and hustle. And if he can just be around the quarterback and near the quarterback, I think he's going to kind of luck himself into, luck is the wrong word, but he's going to have 7 or 8 sacks just because other guys in the defensive line are creating opportunities.
He's got explosion, but he doesn't have like that ton of power. I think is what it is that he's good when he's being one-on-one blocked. Like I think he can consistently win in certain ways when he's being one-on-one. When you give him any kind of extra attention because he's the number one,
the alpha,
target,
right, in the defensive line, right?
He doesn't have the ability to overcome that, and he gets neutralized by double teams. He gets neutralized by a chip. I think you're right. I think if he's on the backside of the protection scheme and he's just allowed to work against a tackle while someone else is being the focus of attention on the other side, I think he's going to more likely to have more success than he has previously. So I'm excited to see him in that context. But again, one thing we've seen from him is inconsistency. So we got to see if he's going to get those opportunities. There's opportunities to be the one, get one-on-one blocking, not necessarily be the focus of the pass protection scheme. He's got to win. He's got to be more consistent. So that's what the Cowboys are going to look for in training camp.
All right, let's talk about another defensive end that I actually think is probably going to play significantly more snaps than Dante Fowler, and that's Dorance Armstrong, who feels a little bit like the forgotten man on this Cowboys defensive line. The Cowboys did give him a contract extension. He did have the best season of his career last year, 5 sacks, 12 quarterback hits before this, Landon, in the first 3 years of his career, 8 combined quarterback hits. He had 12 last year. And by the end of the season, he was a pretty decent pass rusher. Last 6 games of the season, 20 pressures. Against Philadelphia in week 18, 8 pressures on 30 snaps. What can we expect from Dorance Armstrong, who going into year 5, only 22 years old? It's a joke. We joke about his age all the time. He's still only 25, which is kind of incredible. But what can we expect from him?
Yeah, I mean, if I remember correctly, I think he had 4 sacks in the last 5 games. So he really started to come on there at the end of the year as he started to get more snaps. I mean, I just think he's an ascending player. Unfortunately, we've been saying it for a while now, but he's still just incredibly young. I mean, he's still almost as young as some of these guys coming out of the
Yeah,
draft.
he's like 7 months older than Sam Williams.
Yeah, and he's been in the league for 4 years, so this will be his 5th year. So I think that shows you just kind of like what you got in the Cowboys, and he's been able to develop him. And I think the thought process, the hope is that you really started to see it. The issue with Armstrong is that he's always been that classic. You see it in training camp, you don't see it in the regular season. Last year was the first year that we actually started to see it on the field in regular season. It wasn't just that he was getting sacks randomly. He was making plays from time to time. I think he did. He also on special teams as well. Didn't he have a blocked punt? I think so.
Yep.
He kind of showed that he had he was able to take this a little bit more into the regular season. Now we're looking for even more of that. I mean, I think the thing that everyone would love to see is that he takes a huge step and becomes a guy who could give you, 7 or 8 sacks on a consistent basis as like maybe a third defensive end or part of a rotation. I mean, essentially he will be probably the starter for a while. I mean, just in the sense that he may be the first defensive end out there, but I think the idea is that there's going to be heavy rotation between all these guys, and that's why you have these numbers. I mean, if you look at the snap counts between him and then another guy that we'll talk about here in a second in
Chauncey
Terrell
Golston.
Basham. Well, Terrell Basham is what I meant.
Okay.
Is that between those two guys, I think they took something like 1,200 of the defensive end snaps last year. So you're going to want to try to rotate some of those snaps out away from. I love Terrell Basham. We'll talk about him in a second, but he had 650 snaps last year. And we would love to kind of portion those out to someone like more to Armstrong, who missed some time because of injury, more to Lawrence because obviously he missed some time, more to Golston. So, but I also think going back to Armstrong, I think he's a guy that has earned a spot as kind of not the focus, obviously, because you have Demarcus Lawrence and Micah Parsons and Sam Williams, but I think as a guy that is going to take some deference from this team, and we'll have lots more opportunity moving forward than he did last few years.
I think another reason, just really quickly, why I thought Dorance Armstrong improved is he just got to play more. You look at like the second half of the season. Here's his percentage of the defensive snaps from week 10 on. 66%, 71%, 73%, 43, 54, 55, 51, 70. He was just on the field more. And how do you get better in this league? You've got to play. And when you're a 24-year-old that didn't get to play a lot in the first couple of years of his career, it's not really a surprise that he started to play better by the end of the season. So I expect him to play far more than the 500 snaps that we saw last year. I expect him to basically play starter snaps opposite of Demarcus Lawrence. Now, I don't necessarily think he's a right defensive end, but they're going to find ways to get all these guys on the field. So don't worry too much about that. Let's talk about some of the other defensive ends on the roster. We've got quite a few to go through. But Terrell Basham, he's the other vet on this team. Played pretty well in his first year with the Cowboys. What do you expect from him this year?
Yeah, I mean, I think with Basham, he's just a very incredibly consistent player. He's going to give you solid run snaps. He's going to give you some pass rush. It's not going to be a ton, but you can throw him out there, and he's going to hold the edge. He's going to push the pocket a little bit. He's not going to be a guy that, again, that if he's your number one pass rusher, you're in serious trouble.
Yes.
But if he's a guy that you need to throw out there to give you a couple pass rushes because the rest of you guys are gassed, you could do worse for sure. Yep. As a fourth defensive end or wherever his spot is. So I think the idea is probably to get Basham a few less snaps this year. But maybe, what they do instead is kind of, I think he had something like 20 snaps, as a 3 technique. Maybe they do a little bit more of that in some pass rush situations, move him around a little bit more. He's just a valuable piece to have as like kind of a fourth defensive end.
I think his right role is like 20 to 25 snaps as kind of the rotational guy. Where they got in trouble was when he was playing like 55, 60 snaps in a game. That's just too many for him. He's going to get exposed in that part. But 20 to 25 snaps as a rotational guy, come in, play some short yardage stuff. I think that's kind of his ultimate role with this team. One way his snaps could get reduced, though, is if Chauncey Golston takes a step. Chauncey Golston was a 3rd-round pick by the Cowboys, one of these bigger defensive ends, really a edge-setting player. going into year 2, we've heard some, rumblings and rumors that his body's changed. He's bulked up a little bit. He's playing more 3 technique. Well, what do you expect from Golston here in year 2?
His body change made it sound like he was going through puberty.
Well,
his voice dropped a little bit
once they get to the NFL, right? Like their bodies just completely changed from year 1 to year 2.
CeeDee Lamb grew an inch, guys. Yeah, I mean, I think with Golston, they've clearly kind of lined him up for this left defensive end, kick inside to pass rush kind of role that we've seen that they really love. Just as a versatile player. I mean, look, this is a defense that's going to play a lot of different fronts, and I think there's a couple of these guys that they have on this team, especially inside, that are kind of multiple in the way that what alignments they can line up in. I think that Golston is the guy that is the most dynamic of those kind of moving inside and outside guys, right? Like he's the guy who I feel like could be the most dynamic of the kind of versatile down roster pieces. Mm-hmm. We've just seen, he's a young player. He's obviously developed a lot from what it sounds like, just based on the rumblings. He's bulked up. He's gotten stronger. I could easily see him being kind of pushed towards the not the immediate replacement, but the future replacement of Demarcus Lawrence at left defensive end. Yeah. But I do think that he will get, and we talked about it when we talked about interior defensive lineman, I do think that he will get opportunities as a pass rusher inside as well. So I think, his role is going to be, they plug him in wherever they need him, probably mostly specific on the left side. I mean, I think he will take snaps, as a 3 technique. I mean, we saw him take snaps as a 1 at different points last year. So I just think that, we have a couple of these guys on this team that are kind of those, 0 to 5 technique type folks who can play kind of all up and down the line. I think Golston is the defensive end version of that. And on top of that, I think he's probably the most dynamic, explosive. Not that he is very explosive, but I think of those type of players, he's the guy that you feel like could get you something on third down if you needed a sack when he gets a one-on-one situation. Yep. He talked about creators and finishers, right? I think he's a guy who could win late in snaps through hard work, through effort. He's a finisher if someone else can create for him. So I think valuable pieces like Golston, he'll have an increased number of snaps. Again, a guy that will likely take away from that high percentage of Terrell Basham snaps that we saw last year.
I think that Golston, he's eventually going to replace Terrell Basham. And you mentioned Demarcus Lawrence. I think that's like ideally, like if he hits a ceiling down the road, he does that. But for me, like if he can beat out Basham this year or next year, that's a win for the Cowboys, right? Yeah. I got a feeling that the Cowboys are going to be patient here and they're going to give Basham one more year. But if Golston is awesome in camp and they just say, hey, we can move on from Terrell Basham, we can save $2 million and we can give more snaps to a young guy on a rookie contract, we'll do it. But we'll see. There was times last year where Golston played well. Like he had, I'm looking at it now, he had 4 games with 3 or more pressures. And that's pretty surprising considering he didn't play at all the first couple of weeks of the season because he had an injury. I don't believe he did anything in training camp or anything during the preseason. And he comes in and has a couple games where he's productive. I can't wait to see what he looks like in year 2.
Yeah, he was another one of those guys we didn't get to see very much in training camp, so we just kind of.
I think he got hurt early.
Yeah, and the thing is that with rookies who get hurt early, especially on defense, it just feels like they really struggle to kind of find their way back on the field and get snaps if they didn't get a training camp. So kudos to Golston to be able to do that. I mean, he's clearly a very mature, serious guy, and that was one of the things they really liked about him. So that's not surprising that he had an incredible offseason because it seems very important to him. So I'm excited to see exactly what we get from him in training camp.
Yeah, we had a stretch last year starting in week 10 where he went 3 pressures, 4 pressures. And then it feels like he hit a little bit of a rookie wall, whether that's, he battled so hard to come back from his injury. Yep. The next 3 games, 0, 0, 1, 0 pressures. So you're hoping that with some better conditioning, being able to stay healthy, kind of changing his body, he's more productive. But at least we saw it in flashes of him being able to make plays. He needs to improve some of his run fits, because I think he jumped inside a little bit too often
Yeah,
last year and it
yeah.
caused some big runs, but I am hopeful for him kind of going into the future. One more player that we should mention, the Cowboys' second-round pick, Sam Williams. We've talked about him a bunch since the Cowboys have drafted him. We talked about him a lot in the pre-draft process. But now that we're kind of talking about this edge group as a whole, how do you think he factors in this season?
He's the X factor. I mean, Parsons is to a large degree, and like I said, we're going to talk about him when we talk about linebackers. But I think him and Parsons are the unknown and really the boom of this class, right? We know what we're getting out of Demarcus Lawrence. We kind of have an idea of what we're getting out of Chauncey Golston. Dante Fowler, there's inconsistency there, but I think we have a good idea of what the ceiling and floor is of Dante Fowler, right?
Yes.
I think Parsons is kind of a huge spectrum of possibility, but I also think Sam Williams is as well. I think he's a guy that didn't have a lot of experience, still doesn't have a ton of football experience, playing the position or playing football in general.
Mm-hmm.
But was still, I'm pretty sure he was defensive player of the year in the SEC last year. I mean, that just shows you the kind of athleticism and talent. And look, the reason he was drafted where he wasn't because of his production or athletic skill necessarily. It was because of some off-field stuff that the Cowboys feel like they've got their hands around. So I think that there's some excitement here. Obviously, he is a rookie, so there can't be a ton to be expected of a rookie pass rusher. But I think the Cowboys have promoted a very healthy atmosphere here. No one person is being relied on too much outside of Demarcus Lawrence and Parsons, who you feel like you can rely on. So the rest of these guys are going to get opportunities, but not while risking, throwing 50 snaps at any one of these guys and finding out that they're bad. If Sam Williams isn't cutting it early in the season, don't play him. Pull him out and let Fowler take his snaps until he's ready. If Fowler's no good, pull him out. Let Williams take his snaps, or let Basham take his snaps. So I think that they've got contingency plans for all these guys being good and bad. And I think for Sam Williams, he is the real upside for this defensive line, because he's just such an unknown. If he's able to come in and be productive early on, man, suddenly you've got a really, really scary pass rush developed.
Yeah, I don't think the Cowboys are going to force him on the field, but I think there's a good chance he just earns snaps because he's the most athletic front seven player they have outside of Micah Parsons. And if he can just be around the football and he can play hard all the time, we'll see. We should also remember this is somebody that Dan Quinn handpicked, right? Dan Quinn basically got one pick in the first few rounds of this draft, and it was Sam Williams, and that's the guy that he wanted. So I think they're going to look for opportunities and ways to get him on the field. So we'll see. I don't think the Cowboys are banking on him or counting on him, but it wouldn't surprise me at all if he outplays Dante Fowler, he outplays Terrell Basham, and all of a sudden on a key 3rd and 7 against Green Bay, he's on the field and those guys are not.
Yeah, I wouldn't either. I mean, I just think that you just don't know with these guys. I think that's the key thing, is you can't rely on it, but you also can't. You have to be prepared for success. And if Sam Williams suddenly becomes a good player, you need to have a plan for him and how to use him. So that's where I'm hoping the Cowboys are trending with him.
Just want to mention two more names at the bottom of the roster. These are guys that are probably fighting for practice squad spots, but Micah Parsons from Utah, who we spent a lot of time talking about on an earlier show when we were going through some UDFA rankings. Small, undersized pass rusher with not a lot of athleticism, but does have a lot of production at Utah. Keep an eye on him. Basically, what do you want to say? Like a poor man's version of Bradley Anae?
Yeah, I mean, Anae is the guy that keeps coming up in my head whenever I think about him, and I think it's a fair comparison. But I think he's also not quite Bradley Anae, to be honest.
Yeah, I agree. The other one is Big Cat Bryant, who actually came from Auburn, transferred to UCF last year. Yeah, very productive. 13 tackles for a loss, 6 sacks. Just kind of a weird body. 6'5", 240, not super athletic. But, hey, you never know. With a guy named Big Cat, why not?
He's long-levered. He's, like big frame. Yeah, he's not super explosive. But, I think this is a defensive front that likes to play, a whole bunch of alignments, a whole bunch of different assignments. Maybe this is a guy that that you throw on a practice squad for a couple of years and then he becomes a valuable down roster kind of rotational piece. Who knows? But that's kind of what you're hoping for someone.
Yeah, who knows? We'll see. Probably fighting for a practice squad spot,
Yeah.
but Cowboys do have some depth here. One position that they've got a superstar Micah Parsons. They've got a former Pro Bowler and Demarcus Lawrence, who's still really effective when he's on the field. And then a lot of other options. Some players with big draft pedigrees and Dante Fowler, guys with fantastic athleticism with Sam Williams, and then big time producers in college like Terrell Basham, like Chauncey Golston. So a lot of potential solutions here for the Cowboys. All right. That is it for today's show. Thank you guys for tuning in. We want to thank you for making Locked On Cowboys your first listen of the day. Now make your second listen to Locked On NFL podcast. Our national NFL experts and insiders keep fans dialed in with the biggest stories and the latest news from around the league, because an offseason doesn't equal a break in the action. You guys can download the Locked On Cowboys podcast along with the Locked On NFL podcast wherever you get your podcasts. You can follow the show at Locked On Cowboys on Twitter. You can follow Landon at McCoolBCB, and I'm at Marcus _Mosher. We'll see you guys right back here on Tuesday. Bye, everybody.